This isn't just another one of those urban legends you hear and then forget. Far from it. The real story of the Blair Witch, or should I say the supernatural mystery surrounding it, continues to leave a deep imprint to this day. An ancient curse that began centuries ago still echoes through the Black Hills Forest in Maryland. You're about to discover everything from the start, from Ellie Kedward, the woman accused of witchcraft, to the mysterious disappearance of 3 young filmmakers who entered this haunted forest in search of the truth, and were never seen again. What was meant to be just a documentary turned into a phenomenon known as the Blair Witch Project 1999. But to this day, no one knows if it was fiction or reality. If you think you've seen everything in the world of horror, be very careful, because this goes beyond cheap scares. We're talking about dark rituals, occult symbols, an invisible force lurking in the dark, and psychological terror that plays with your mind. So, are you up for it? It all began in the late 18th century in a forgotten village called Blair. A woman named Ellie Kedward was accused of something that at the time was worse than death: witchcraft. They said she lured children into her home with sweet promises, and inside, she performed rituals using their blood. The population panicked. After all, at that time, any sign of witchcraft was treated as a real threat. The sentence was harsh. Ellie was dragged to the Black Hills Forest, tied to a tree, and left there in the middle of winter. Imagine the cold cutting through the skin, the hunger gnawing from inside, and the fear. Alone, surrounded by snow and shadows. Death seemed inevitable. But did she really die? This is where the real supernatural mystery begins to take shape. Days later, when they tried to recover the body, it had disappeared. Just like that. No blood, no bones, no trace of Ellie having been there. And then came the most bizarre part. The children who testified against her started to disappear one by one, without a trace. The village plunged into terror, and it wasn't long before everyone started to flee from there. Over time, Blair vanished off the map, literally. The place was abandoned and fell into oblivion. But the stories didn't die. The legend of the Blair Witch only grew, spreading like an ancient curse that crosses generations. They say a malevolent entity now inhabits that haunted forest. And guess the most feared name among the trees to this day? Ellie Kedward. Over time, the old village of Blair got a new name, Burkittsville. But changing the name didn't erase the past, nor the ancient curse that hung over the area. Those who lived there spoke of a malevolent presence, voices whispering in the dark, and a constant sensation that something was watching, something that never left the haunted forest. The place looked calm on the outside, but inside, it carried deep scars. In the 1940s, the silence was brutally broken. A hermit named Rustin Parr appeared in town claiming he had finished his work. Confused and covered in dirt, he confessed to having killed 7 children, under orders from a female voice that came from the forest. The police, shocked, discovered the bodies in his cabin, mutilated and positioned as if in a ritual. And on the walls, occult symbols etched with disturbing precision. The scene was worthy of a cursed documentary. With every detail, the case became darker. Who was this voice? Had Rustin Parr been just a puppet in the hands of the malevolent entity said to inhabit Black Hills? For many, the answer was clear. Ellie Kedward had returned, or rather, maybe she had never left. The forest had chosen another to fulfill its dark will. Burkittsville was marked forever. The town became synonymous with unsolved mysteries and paranormal phenomena. Anyone passing through feels the heavy atmosphere, as if time had stopped, as if everything was waiting for someone new to enter the forest. And guess what? That's exactly what happened decades later, when 3 young filmmakers decided to delve into the story of the Blair Witch. In 1994, 3 film students decided to dive deep into the legend of the Blair Witch. Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams had a simple plan: record an investigative documentary, interview the residents of Burkittsville, and explore the dreaded Black Hills Forest. They didn't know, or pretended not to know, that they were poking something much older, darker, and hungry for attention. At first, everything seemed normal. Cameras rolling, strange testimonials, residents recounting stories about the malevolent entity, the dark rituals, the hermit par. It was just another experimental project. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, things started to change. They heard footsteps at night, found occult symbols hanging from branches, and gradually fear took over. What was supposed to be simple filming turned into a real psychological struggle, real psychological terror. Days later, the trio vanished. No clues, no bodies. All that was left were tapes, found a year later, buried in the basement of an abandoned house deep in the woods. And what those tapes showed sent chills down everyone's spine. Screams in the dark, muffled cries, someone standing in a corner of the wall. Figures among the trees, whispers, desperation, and a suffocating feeling that something invisible was hunting them, an unseen force that seemed to toy with them. This case turned into one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the century. The tapes were used to put together the 1999 Blair Witch Project, presented as if it were real, and many believed it. But what still sends shivers down the spine is that, despite all the explanations that it was just a found footage horror, there are still those who swear it was all true. What if it was? When the Blair Witch Project premiered in theaters, the world stopped. And it wasn't just because of the fear. It was the way everything seemed real. The shaky camera, the improvised dialogues, the anguish in the characters' eyes. It didn't look like acting. And the marketing was so well done that even the official website claimed that Heather, Josh, and Mike were missing. That's when the question arose that was never fully answered. Is it real or is it fiction? The official answer is that it was all a mockumentary, but there are details that even skeptics find intriguing. The Black Hills Forest really exists. So does Burkittsville. And what's most haunting? Locals still report paranormal phenomena. They say the forest whispers at night, that strange symbols continue to appear, that there's something out there, something watching. The filmmakers used brilliant techniques. The actors had no fixed script. They slept in the woods, starved, and didn't know what would happen the next day. Their reactions were real. Some attacks on the tents were made unexpectedly by the directors themselves to capture authentic fear. The scene with the disoriented compass and mysterious sounds were inspired by true accounts of the haunted forest. In the end, what's most terrifying isn't knowing whether it all happened or not. What truly scares is realizing how terror can be psychological, how an evil presence can hide in doubt, in the dark, in what we can't see. And each year more people report disappearances and bizarre encounters in the forest. Maybe the story of the Blair Witch was never just a movie. The Blair Witch Project didn't just scare the world, it revolutionized horror. It was one of the first to use the found footage horror style, a filming technique that simulates real recordings found after a tragic event. The audience believed it, and that was the secret to its success. It was as if we were watching real scenes of the Blair Witch, straight from the victim's camera. A type of raw terror, without makeup, without monsters jumping out. Just pure, escalating fear. The genius was in the promotional campaign. Even before the release, the producers spread the idea that the three young people were really missing. They created websites, fake news reports, even missing person posters. The result? People went to the theaters believing it was a cursed documentary. It was the first major case of viral marketing in cinema, and it shaped the way films would be promoted from then on. This tactic was so successful that other films copied the formula in the following years. Paranormal Activity, REC, Cloverfield, all drew from the same source. But none could recreate the aura of mystery and discomfort of the Blair Witch. Because it wasn't just about what was seen, it was about what wasn't seen. The invisible force, the dark rituals, the hidden symbols. It was all subtle, and therefore, even more disturbing. The movie cost only $25,000 and grossed over $250 million, an absurd return, proving that fear doesn't need special effects. Just a good story, told believably, with a touch of supernatural mystery. And of course, with that lingering doubt that never leaves the mind. Was it all really true? The real story of the Blair Witch didn't come out of nowhere. It was shaped from various urban legends and obscure figures from history. Ellie Kedward, for example, bears traces of Molly Dyer, a supposed witch from Virginia, and the occultist Edward Kelly, known for his esoteric rituals. The blending of these names and stories helped create a unique myth, shrouded in dark rituals and paranormal phenomena. It's as if several shadows had merged into one malignant presence. Moreover, there are records of macabre tales like the case of Coffin Rock, where 5 men were found dead, tied up, and with organs removed, and soon after, the bodies mysteriously disappeared. These horrifying stories intertwined around the Black Hills forest, creating a web of unresolved mysteries that fed the collective imagination of the region. Nothing there is by chance. Every tree carries a secret, every trail, a warning. The most fascinating aspect is how these legends have been passed down from generation to generation. The residents of Burkittsville avoid discussing the subject. Some say it's just superstition. Others lower their voices and warn, "Don't go into the forest alone." The occult symbols found on the trees, the whispers coming out of nowhere, the feeling of being followed. It all still happens. How can one explain it? Perhaps it can't be explained. Perhaps it should just be respected. In the end, the legend of the Blair Witch became a patchwork quilt of terror. Part history, part invention, and part something that nobody dares to name. That's what makes it so powerful. It has no face. It lacks logic. It only has a dark legacy, stitched together with fear, mystery, and silence. And the most bizarre part, the more you try to understand, the more entangled in the forest you seem to become. One of the best-kept secrets of the Blair Witch Project 1999 is behind the scenes. Few people know, but the actors didn't have a traditional script. Everything was based on improvisation. Heather, Josh, and Mike were only given vague directions about what to do or say, and this lent the scenes a terrifying authenticity. The fear we see in the recordings isn't acting, it's real. They were truly lost, hungry, exhausted, and paranoid. There was a scene, for instance, where the map disappears. That wasn't planned by the actors. It was the directors who made it disappear on purpose. The goal? To create real tension. It worked. The friction between them began to increase, and the feeling of abandonment and desperation grew naturally. All this was captured by the cameras, reinforcing the atmosphere of psychological terror and the weight of the evil presence hovering over them. And remember, the tents being attacked at night? Another director's trap. They waited for the cast to fall asleep and then stormed the camp, shaking everything, emitting sounds and whispers. The screams we hear are real. They had no idea what was happening, and that's what makes the film so visceral. Nothing there is clean or rehearsed. It's raw, instinctive, as if fear itself had taken control. This approach, though risky, created a landmark in horror cinema. It transformed a low-budget production into an immersive and genuine experience, and elevated the story of the Blair Witch to another level. The line between fiction and reality became so blurred that, to this day, people watch the film with a knot in their stomach, because they know that anguish wasn't feigned. The realism of the Blair Witch Project 1999 didn't just come from the actors' improvisation. The creators used subtle technical details to feed the mystery. A striking example: ambient sound was only captured by Mike's camera. This created a feeling of auditory isolation, increasing the tension. When Heather or Josh filmed, the silence was denser, as if something was lurking, unseen. A simple trick, but extremely effective. Another sinister detail was the compass scene. It simply stopped working, spinning directionless. This wasn't a special effect. It was caused by real magnetic interference, recorded during the shooting in the Black Hills forest. Coincidence? Maybe, but it served as yet another piece in the supernatural mystery puzzle. Something in that forest seemed to mess with even the laws of nature, as if time and space were being distorted. The lack of soundtrack was also an intentional feature. Without background music, everything felt more raw, closer to reality. The noise of the leaves, the breaking branches, the panting breath, all became more impactful. This heightened the feeling of vulnerability, as if the viewer were there with them, lost, trying to figure out what the heck was happening in that haunted forest. These technical decisions show the creators' care in making the terror as believable as possible. Each camera glitch, each strange noise, each abrupt cut. Nothing was by chance. These elements made the legend of the Blair Witch so convincing, because when even the compass loses its way, how can you trust your own sanity? What's most frightening about the Blair Witch Project isn't monsters or grotesque visual effects. It's what you don't see. It's what your mind imagines. The terror there is subtle, psychological, built up gradually, and that's why it's so effective. From the start, the film plants uncomfortable feelings: isolation, loss of control, no way out. The forest becomes a labyrinth, and the more they try to leave, the more trapped they seem. The directors used clever techniques to amplify this sensation. Gradually, the cameras become more limited. The close-ups increase. External sounds disappear. This disconnects the viewer from the real world and thrusts them into the character's madness. The forest isn't just a setting, it's a living organism, a psychological labyrinth where time, logic, and direction vanish. Literally. Moreover, there is a slow breakdown of trust between the characters. Heather starts getting blamed for everything. Josh disappears. Mike goes into denial. Each of them sinks into a different kind of despair. Paranoia grows. No one trusts anyone anymore. And all of this happens without needing to show blood, without relying on obvious jump scares. It's a psychological horror that creeps into your mind until the viewer feels just as lost as they do. This style, by the way, influenced an entirely new kind of storytelling. Films that prefer whispers over screams, suggestion over shock. And that's exactly how the sinister presence of the Blair Witch became so impactful. Not because she appears, but precisely because she never does. The fear comes from what you don't see. And that, my friend, is the kind of horror that lingers even after the lights come back on. The more you analyze the Blair Witch Project 1999, the clearer it becomes. Nothing in that movie is random. The hidden symbols scattered throughout the forest, the stick figures, the stone circles, all of them carry meaning. Are they remnants of rituals, warnings, or maybe even spiritual traps? The forest itself feels like a massive sanctuary for some malevolent entity, and the symbols, instead of offering protection, seem to imprison, to summon, to mark the chosen ones. One particularly eerie detail is the repetition of events, as if the characters are trapped in an endless cycle. They walk all day and end up right where they started. This fuels the theory that the forest doesn't obey the normal laws of time and space. Some fans believe there's a time loop or even some kind of supernatural manipulation, like the witch controls reality itself, an eternal trap where no one escapes. And there's more. The connection between Rustin Parr and the young filmmakers runs deeper than it seems. The way Mike stands in the corner of the room in the final scene mirrors exactly what Parr did to his victims. This raises a disturbing question. Was he being possessed? Does the forest force the same crimes to be repeated with new victims, generation after generation? Is there an ancient curse damning anyone who dares to film the truth? Nothing is explained outright, and that's what makes it brilliant. The movie never gives you answers. It only shows fragments, symbols, screams, and silence. It's up to the audience to piece it together, or get lost in the process. Because when time itself becomes an enemy, and reality starts slipping through your fingers, all that's left is fear. A fear that doesn't end when the credits roll. The behind the scenes of the Blair Witch Project is almost as terrifying as the film itself. For starters, Heather Donahue was cast at the last minute and still delivered one of the most iconic performances in horror cinema. That monologue where she's crying, her face lit only by the flashlight, trembling and apologizing. It was completely improvised. She didn't even know the camera was that close. The extreme zoom was an accident, and it became a defining image of the film's psychological horror. The cast went through a real ordeal. No hotels, no trailers, no dressing rooms. They slept in tents in the middle of the forest with little food and cryptic instructions left in envelopes. It was like a psychological experiment orchestrated by the directors. As the days went by, the emotional exhaustion was real, and that's exactly what gave authenticity to their reactions. When they scream, cry, or break down, they're not acting, they're living it. The crew used military survival techniques to control the filming process. Everything was designed to create tension and unpredictability. The nighttime attacks, the eerie noises, even separating the actors at certain moments. It was all part of the plan. It was as if the set itself had become a character, a hostile living environment where the witch's presence could manifest at any moment. This radical approach turned the film into a one-of-a-kind experience. Instead of relying on visual effects, they leaned into disorientation, exhaustion, and real fear. And the result was a landmark in horror cinema. Something raw, cruel, visceral. As if the very process of making the movie had summoned the unseen force lurking in the woods. And let's be honest, what if it really did? The success of the Blair Witch Project wasn't just luck. It was a masterclass in marketing. The creators knew how to use mystery as their greatest weapon. Even before the film was released, rumors were already circulating online about the real-life disappearance of Heather, Josh, and Mike. Fake police reports, fan-driven investigations on forums, all of it helped create an illusion of reality behind the fiction. And the audience took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. With a budget of just $25,000, the movie grossed nearly $250 million. That's right, a return of more than 4,000 times its cost. An unprecedented achievement that made Hollywood history. The formula, low budget plus great idea plus smart marketing, became the blueprint. And it didn't take long for other films to follow in its footsteps. Paranormal Activity, for example, directly borrowed from this playbook and reaped the rewards. But the most striking impact was its cultural legacy. The Blair Witch Project redefined fear in cinema. It proved that horror doesn't need to show. It needs to suggest. That real terror lives in the audience's mind, not on the screen. It left a trail of influence in games, TV series, books, and even real-life supernatural investigations. There are still people who visit Burkittsville, searching for that haunted forest, and they come back swearing they heard whispers among the trees. Today, even with cutting-edge technology and multi-million-dollar budgets, many films fail to recreate the impact that Blair Witch had, because that fear was built with imagination, improvisation, and sheer brilliance. And maybe that's the scariest part, knowing that with so little, they achieved so much. As if the very entity from the legend had whispered inspiration into the creator's ears. So, after all this, would you still dare to step into the Black Hills Forest? Is the Blair Witch just a brilliant fabrication, or a dark echo of something that was never truly explained? Maybe the real terror isn't in the trees, but in the unanswered questions we carry with us. Because when an urban legend spans generations, shakes the world, and still leaves us with that lingering chill, there's something about it that we simply can't ignore. But here's a thought. What if fear is an invitation? A call to look deeper, to face the unknown, to challenge what seems impossible. Psychological horror, as we've seen, is more than just entertainment. It's a powerful lens. It reveals what's hidden, both outside and within us. And maybe, in the end, understanding the story of the Blair Witch is also a way of confronting our own shadows. So tell me, where do you draw the line between reality and fiction? How far does your courage go when fear comes knocking? What would you do if you were lost in that forest with no map, no way out? Just your mind trying not to break? Think about it. And if this story got under your skin, like it did for millions around the world, it means the mystery is still alive, and now you're part of it. If you enjoyed this dive into the darkness, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and get ready. Because we have many more dark stories to tell. And some of them are far more real than you'd imagine.